Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Career Diaries by Elemed, the podcast dedicated to talking about careers in the MedTech industry. And today I have Olga van Grol-Lawor, who is Manager of Global Regulatory Intelligence and Advocacy at Boston Scientific. Welcome, Olga.
Thanks, Elena. It's an absolute pleasure to be here chatting with you.
I'm super happy that I managed to get that all right first take. That was indeed a mouthful, but I managed. So I have to say, Olga, you have one of the most interesting job titles, I think, out there. I have to say. So for everybody listening, how would you describe what you do as Manager of Global Regulatory and Advocacy?
Wow, what do I do as the Manager of Global Regulatory Intelligence and Advocacy? Well, quite a lot, I suppose, would be the answer. So from a regulatory intelligence perspective, I suppose we scan the regulatory environment globally and look for different trends, etc. We'd also take on research and things like this if we got questions. We also pull together all of the the new and changing regulatory requirements or new guidances, opportunities to comment, all that type of stuff. We're also very active from an advocacy perspective in all of the various trade associations. So in Europe, places like MedTech Europe, or in the national level, the Irish MedTech Association would be two that I would be particularly active in, but also, in the US, AdvaMed, MEDMA, all the various trade associations, things like the International Medical Device Regulatories Forum, the IMGRF, and so on and so forth. And so we're a small team, right? So we can't be everywhere at once and we don't know everything, right? So I'd say we're more of a bridge rather than a funnel. When people come to us, let's say, and there's a new requirement in China or, wherever the case may be, depending on what it is, we would have that network internally to be able to reach out to the right people to get, comments in that will, influence the legislation. And then, but externally, I suppose we'd be a little bit, the face of the organization, in a lot of these trade associations, etc. So I remember one time saying that, I had a kind of a spider, I had a web and I was the spider, but nobody really likes that analogy.
Have you got any other analogies?
Yeah, my boss had a much better one. She was like, we're a bridge, not a funnel. I was like, yeah, that's better. Okay.
So I think it's worth explaining to people how this podcast came about, because we connected at a conference where I think I was hosting, or we were talking about a session on careers. And what was really interesting for me was how you'd managed to transition from what I would call more of a classic regulatory affairs role into this sort of new growing area of regulatory, which is regulatory intelligence advocacy. And so you shared a bit of an insight about how, actually you sort of created the role for yourself, or you spotted an opportunity and put yourself forward. And I said to you, hey, we need to talk more about this. You need to come onto the podcast and share your story with everyone, because that proactive approach and seizing opportunities and spotting opportunities is something that, in my experience, from what I've seen, is the thing that really can accelerate people's career. And so today we're going to be talking about seizing opportunities and just going for it. I'm super excited to learn more about your experience and your story when it comes to this topic. So first of all, maybe could you outline how you came into this role in advocacy and regulatory intelligence?
In a very unusual way. I would say, if you want the kind of the origin story, I came from a completely different field, and I think that's a similar story to a lot of folks who have been in the industry a little while, because today we see folks like Tom Melvin creating these wonderful masters in regulatory, but those type of things didn't exist back when I ended up in regulatory. And so my undergraduate degree is actually in equine science. right? And if you talk about saying yes to opportunities, I think my whole career has been a series of saying yes to opportunities that just kind of arose, really right down from before I'd left university. We had a final year project, and I did mine on grazing and grassland management practices in Irish thoroughbred stud farms. I had this one guy ring me from, one of the big stud farms, and more or less to tell me that he wasn't going to fill in my survey. And we ended up having this big discussion. And I, at the end of it, thought he's never going to do my survey. And he actually turned around and said, what are you doing when you finish university? We have a lab on the farm. Would you, if you're interested, would you come and work for us or come in for an interview and a chat? And so I did. And that was my start. Like, I didn't know I wanted to work in a lab prior to that. But when I went, again, it wasn't a traditional role. I didn't go into a huge lab where I had mentors and, people teaching me things. I went in to a fully functional lab, and kind of looked around and went, oh my God, what do I do? how am I going to run this? Like, I have a gap in my knowledge. What am I going to do? So I reached out to my university lecturers who, worked in, let's say the most prestigious, lab in the land when it came to horses. And, I'd go up to them and they'd send me home with homework. Plate this out, see what bacteria grows, do this cytology, do this, do this, do this, bring us tomorrow and tell us what you found. So, I think that unusual start helped me be resourceful, right? As in, I don't have this knowledge now. Where can I find it? And so I think that's helped to drive a lot of my career, and I went from kind of the labs to doing, I was eventually going to open my own lab. That was my plan. And I decided I needed to have some published paper behind me, kind of, this is my bread and butter. This is where I'm going to earn all my money. And so I was working for the largest equine veterinary laboratory in Australia and doing the research with a university in the UK, and I could write it anywhere. So I came to the Netherlands because my now husband is Dutch, hence the unusual name. And I was writing it up here, but I needed a little bit more pressure because I wasn't in an academic environment. So I thought I need a full-time job. That's what I need. And so I went to a job agency and they sent me to Medtronic, which is a big multinational medical device company. But they didn't give me a job spec, Elena. Can you imagine? No job spec. So I went down and I walked in the door and they said, do you know what regulatory affairs is? And I said, no.
Be honest.
Yeah. And they were like, well, when you pick up a device, or a product or a toy and you see a CE mark on it. And I was like, no. Like, really, I have no idea what you're talking about. But they grilled me anyway for about 45 minutes. And they rang me when I was walking home and offered me the job. But it was a 3-month contract, right? Just to help with a backlog, nothing terribly fancy. And at the time, it would have definitely been, a step down money wise and all the rest. I'd gone from running a laboratory to, an assistant regulatory affairs specialist. But I thought, it's a 3-month thing. I'll finish writing my thesis. I'll go back to horses. I'll open my own lab. That's great. But 5 weeks in, they offered me a year contract. And then I got a permanent contract and kind of you stay, you'll move up. And it was kind of it was so interesting. It was so new to me. And at the time I was supporting the Middle East and Africa. And, back then they were only countries like Saudi Arabia were only setting up their regulatory framework. And so it was nearly a part of the business that was underrepresented, or the market wasn't as important, certainly not as important as it is today. So I guess it didn't, not that it didn't matter, but there was opportunities for, people who maybe weren't the most experienced in the game to, kind of look at things, with fresh eyes and, come up with ideas and support and all that type of stuff. So, and there was, I suppose, a lot of advocacy in that in a way, because you had to advocate internally for just deliverables against all the other markets in the world who wanted support from the business or the divisions. You had to advocate with the regulators in these countries because they weren't mature systems. And while they were asking for the sun, moon, and stars, maybe it wasn't realistic, or they didn't have the resources internally to look at these files in the way that they were asking. And so maybe then you were advocating for, a little bit more on reliance, like, well, if it has a CE mark already, could we not, make it that you only require X, Y, and Z? And so I suppose that kind of got me into advocacy. Like, I knew I always had a passion for it. And then, in university as well, I was into politics. But I was in an unusual way. Like, obviously, you had to choose a political party, but I was one of these folks who I just talked to everybody, And so I always, kind of had not a lobbyist in me, but, I liked politics. I liked influencing. I liked talking to people, all that type of stuff. So I was at Medtronic, and I was very happy at Medtronic, I have to say. And a headhunter reached out to me and said, we have this opportunity at Boston Scientific. Would you be interested? And at the time, I was curious more than anything, because I knew Boston had no regulatory folks in the Netherlands. And so I said, well, show me the description. And they did, and advocacy was a large part of that. But it was also the EU MDR, and the MDR had just come out, and it was an opportunity to be, on the core team at Boston Scientific, looking at this new regulation and, pulling together advocacy and all that kind of stuff. And there was a lot more to the role as well, but that was the part that grabbed me. I was like, yeah, I this sounds interesting. I'll have the conversation anyway, right? I'll at least have the conversation. And it happened very quickly. I had 5 interviews in 2 weeks and an offer. And I was like, oh my God, I wasn't expecting it, so I had to just take that leap at that time. I was like, well, if I don't do it, if I don't do it, I'll always wonder and I'll always regret. And I don't want to look back on my career and, have this kind of, oh, if I'd done that, I wonder what would have happened. So I took the opportunity. And the nice thing about it was that it was a role that had never existed before. Long way to get to your kind of point, but it was a role that didn't exist before. And because of that, my boss at the time, she had certain ideas about, how she wanted, what she needed from the role or what she wanted. But because it was a new role, I got to shape it a little bit, to what my strengths were and play with that. And that was great. And so advocacy was a part of it, but it was only a part of it, right? It wasn't a dedicated advocacy role. And at the time, there was no dedicated advocacy roles in our company at all. So that was interesting. But then I think we had the opportunity to show the value, right, of what advocacy can do, not just in, obviously the influencing part of it, and showing, as in, if this had happened, this would have been, the repercussions or the ramifications for the company, but it didn't, this happened. But also just having access to knowledge, right? Even if something is coming down the track that, isn't great, if you know upfront, you can prepare for it, right? So being able to show the value of all of those things, I think, was incredibly valuable. And then a couple of years in, an advocacy function was formed at a corporate level. And I guess because I had already been doing so much advocacy on, in the EU and the EMEA side of things, I was quite visible to that side of the organization. And it kind of just naturally progressed from there.
Yeah. So really, really interesting. Because you highlight all these different moments where you could easily have just said no and gone with sort of like almost like the safer option, right? It's like, for example, you're at Medtronic, big company, really well-known company, you're doing super well, you get approached about something, okay, you're curious, but then you go through an interview process within 2 weeks, which is a fast process.
They've been looking for a while, I think.
Yeah, okay.
At the right end of it.
and then you have an offer on the table, and like it would have been very easy and safer almost, right, feeling wise, to go, look, it's great that I got the offer, but I could stick with the status quo. It's all moved too fast. Haven't really thought it through. So why don't I just stay at Medtronic? Actually taking the yes and taking the decision to just take that leap of faith what has propelled you to where you are today. Has it ever not worked out for you where you've taken a leap of faith and you've regretted it?
I think everything's about perspective, right? Because no matter what you do, like if you take the leap, no matter what the outcome, you come away with something, right? Like you learn something. And so going back, like I was at Medtronic and I was very happy. And another thing, right? I had just come back from maternity leave with my first child. Okay. And I worked in this very flexible environment with a great boss. And, I was high potential. And, I knew all of these things. So, yeah, it was 100% the safe thing to do. But kind of why to take it, not just the looking back, but I think it has to be kind of like there has to be a reason to take it. Right. So for me, there was a kind of a trifecta. It was a role that I definitely wanted, right? It was the advocacy, as I said, I was just so interested in it. The person who was the hiring manager at the time, we had an affinity. We had an unusual kind of similar backgrounds. And you don't have to have similar backgrounds, but she was a horsey person as well. And we just clicked, when you just click with someone. Yeah. And so that was great. And then the package, like they were offering me a good package. So it was a trifecta. And I was nearly kind of, when I was leaving, and I was very transparent about the whole thing. I think you have to be, and it's important not to burn any bridges on your way out.
Yeah.
So, I was very, very transparent, and, they had offered, well, I won't go into, but anyway, I was transparent, but it wasn't just, the opportunity. It was kind of like, I have to do it for myself and for my family too. Like this is, an important opportunity for me, has it ever not worked out? I think I can think more of situations where something bad has happened, but I've taken something away from it, right? Okay. I'm really odd examples are coming into my head, not Stuart Ragg, but so for example, I remember when I was still in the laboratory job, and one of the things I liked about one of the places I worked was that they had a hospital barn, where the vets took all the samples, but I got to do a bit of the hospital work as well. And it was one of the horses had an went into anaphylaxis, or given a penicillin jab and dropped to the ground and just started shaking. It was horrific. It was an awful thing to see, and just running in to where the vet was with clients, and you can't run in screaming and shouting, but kind of running in and just saying you need to come now, and them looking at me going, no, I'm busy. I think just learning to communicate in the the one word, with a look and a tone that isn't nobody else would get, but kind of like, no, now. And he literally dropped everything and just ran, because realized in that instant that it was so important. So it's a bit of an unusual example, but I think you can learn how to communicate. You can take something away from every situation that you're in, even if it isn't a positive one. And I'd just like to say, no animals were harmed. The horse made a full recovery.
That's good, important bit of information, because we were all curious to know the outcome of the horse and if it survives. So let's just talk about saying yes, because I'm sure there might be people thinking, okay, great concept, but you can't say yes to everything, because then you sort of end up being spread too thin, overwhelmed, maybe not making progress, at the same speed as, I don't know, if you just selectively pick a few things and go 100% on that. So how do you find the balance between being open to opportunities and saying yes when opportunities come your way, versus not getting overwhelmed and spreading yourself too thin? What's your strategy?
That's a really good question. And, I think it's a very pertinent one. And, I'll say, for me, there was kind of two different aspects to this. There's the saying yes to opportunities internally and saying yes to opportunities externally, right? And both are equally important when you're, especially in a kind of an advocacy role where networking and visibility and things like that are important. Okay. So from a job perspective, and just in general, it has to make sense. You have to be gaining something from it, right? It has to be of value to you. You're either filling a gap in your knowledge, let's say if it's an internal stretch assignment or something like that, or it's giving you additional visibility, access to new people, to different functions, things like that. So you have to be getting something from it as well, right? It's a kind of a two-way thing, right? You're giving something, but you're getting something in return. And not every opportunity or the way it's presented is exactly what you need at the time. And I think it's important to also understand that you can negotiate these things, because like I got offered a stretch assignment within the advocacy organization for a year at the time. It's going back a couple of years. And my boss at the time, was very transparent. And she was like, they're giving you this great opportunity. And, but I don't want to lose you, but obviously I'll support you if you want to go. But honestly, we sat down and we looked at it, what the ask was, what would I have been doing if I had gone for that year, And when I was so excited at first, because I said it's dedicated advocacy. Like, of course I'll go. I'll be mad not to go. This is my foot in the door moment. But I didn't go. And we looked at it and we went back and said, you know what? I'll do a 20% stretch assignment with you. I'm not taking this role because, when we looked at the list of things, we structured, my boss was like, you're not doing that. You can do, this is no, you're not getting anything from doing any of these things. You're just kind of doing someone else's donkey work. But so from that perspective, I did the 20% stretch assignment instead. And for me, and I brought a lot of value to the organization in doing that. And I got a lot out of doing it. And I still got the foot in the door and the exposure and, all of that kind of stuff. But, sometimes it can be important to weigh it, realistically, right? But that, kind of externally as well, I think you have to be very careful. I think at the start, you have a tendency to say yes to everything because you're just so excited you've been asked, right? I was definitely like that, and that's good. And I think to a certain extent, you need to do it for a little while to increase your visibility and, to become known and things like that, and to, have the opportunity to build your network, etc. But it's not a state that is maintainable, right? Like I have a family, I've got young children. I can't be working every night on, things that are on top of my job, external things that I like and I really want to do, but that maybe I'm doing on my own time. And then also, the risk of burnout, I think is especially today, right? So many people are burning out and it's this constant culture of on. So I think, well, you can definitely have periods of this kind of, bursts where you do more and you kind of seem to be everywhere and you're doing lots and lots and lots. At a certain point, you have to kind of take a step back and say, now I'm going to choose what I'm doing. And I'm going to choose the things that either I bring the most value to, makes most sense for me to do, or that I get the most out of doing. And probably a kind of a balance, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, so really about and I think you make a really valid point about evaluating each opportunity and saying, okay, what do I get from this, and how does this align with where I'm trying to go and where my gaps are, and how do I grow and develop as a person by doing this thing, and actually making a conscious decision before jumping into the yes.
And the one thing can I just add one more thing, because I think, I kind of said about, not doing someone else's, I think I used the word donkey work, whatever, but there are also times when, it's important to understand that maybe you need to take a step, you need to take to get a foot in the door, you need to step down. And I did that just to get into regulatory, right? At the time it wasn't conscious, but, I had a very good career in what I was doing previously. And I took quite a substantial, drop in pay and things like that. But, it was a foot in the door to a new career. Right. And I use that as my opportunity to get my foot in the door. And then, you build your profile, you show your value, you grow. right? So sometimes you do need to maybe take a step back as well. But I think you evaluate every opportunity as it comes, and take it from there.
Yeah, and the importance of sort of like that first in, I can't stress it enough, because everyone that I talk to, there's always been it's always come from somebody just giving them a chance, and then super, super successful people, they're given a small chance, and then they just fly with it, and so having just being open-minded about not every career is linear. It doesn't have to follow a straight upwards path. Side steps can still bring immense value and immense growth, and is still growing if you sidestep, or if sometimes you step down in order to, for example, you might be a VP in a startup company, right? But that company might be only 10 people. So whilst you might have a VP title, it's not the same as being a VP at Medtronic or a big organization, right? So you might then take a step down in title in order to get that bigger company exposure. But then you're able to, once you get into a bigger company, there's more runway for you then to grow, and there's more complexity and matrices and all that sort of stuff that you won't necessarily get when you're working in startups. So it's important to be open-minded. What I'm interested in is, for you, is it about being intentional? So what I mean by that is, are you somebody that sets really clear goals and objectives of personally, and professionally, where you want to be, really identifying, okay, these are my gaps, and then going out and provoking situations where you can then gain the experience? Or is it more just being receptive to things as they come to you?
I think it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
That sounds like the real regulatory answer. It's kind of in the middle. It's great. It depends. Yeah. No, but honestly, I do, for myself anyway, it has been both. It's being open to opportunities, because you don't always know where you want to end up. Like, it honestly took me a while to figure out, what my strengths were, what I really liked, where I could add the most value. So at the start, I definitely wasn't very intentional. I was just very open to opportunities and new experiences, right? But I think that, kind of once you understand, where you want to go, and it doesn't have to be like an exact defined point, it can be a direction as well. Okay. Because not everybody knows, like, I want to be the VP of Reg Affairs by the age of, not everybody has that, right? I certainly didn't, but it was more, the direction, being intentional about a direction for me. And I think that's very powerful. Once you understand where it is you want to go, it's easier to get there. And I think you can be more aware of the opportunities as well. And I remember, I kind of thanking my old boss, like the person who had hired me at Boston, for all of the opportunities they'd given me, especially in the advocacy space. And they just kind of laughed and said, well, like, I opened the door, but like, kind of 99 people would have walked through that door and not done a lot. You went through the door and, did X, Y, and Z, created a new role for yourself, ultimately created a new role for yourself within the company. Right. So it's what you do with the opportunities, and then being, intentional about, like, I was very intentional about the advocacy, and that I thought that it was not undervalued, but I suppose kind of undervalued, or there was so much potential in this area that it was underutilized, that, we can really show where it adds value. And people started to listen, right? And then when that happens, you start to get more resources, then you can, really build it out and show even more value. So it's kind of a win-win, and you can't do any of that without being intentional, right?
Yeah. And you've mentioned quite a few times about showing your value, adding value, and sort of visibility. Like, can you expand a little bit more on what you mean when you talk about it's important to take an opportunity, but also to show your value to the company?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, just talking about value, I'm going to kind of segue a tiny bit, and then I'll get back to. So yeah. Well, no, because I think it's very important as well to understand your own value, right? And where your strengths lie, and to be yourself. Because when something comes naturally to you, you don't have to. Not that you don't have to try that hard. That makes it sound lazy, but it's more, it's easier for you. It's more natural, and you can perform better, and you do it subconsciously, right? You didn't even have to think about it. So I remember someone saying to me, recently, like, wow, the way you work a room is like so impressive. And I nearly fell over. I was like, if someone asked me to work a room, I would be like, well, how do you do that? I was like, oh, okay. But it was just because, like, naturally, I'm very curious. I love people. I love talking to people. I love making connections, not just making connections, for myself, but connecting other people who I think might enjoy speaking to each other or can help someone, help each other with something. And that comes very naturally to me. It's probably one of my strengths. I don't even realize it. And then talking to this other person, they were kind of saying, like, if they had to do it, like they would lose so much energy just from being so nervous, it would make them nearly scared to
Yeah.
have to do that. And so if you have to expend that much energy to force yourself to do something that doesn't come naturally, maybe that isn't the best fit for you, right? Because there's so much, there's a much better way to expend that energy. Like, as I said, like, I wouldn't know how to work a room. It's something I love talking to people. I love talking to strangers. I want to know who you are. I want to know what your story is. But that other person, that it would put them into a cold sweat. But that's the person who I get all of my key insights from, let's say from the company, and they do the digging and they find, give me the data and things like that. So that's their strength. Like, I would lose interest. It would not be for me. I'm in the here and the now, and who are you and what's going on, and what can we do, and big picture, whereas they're much more in the details. So I think you have to find where your value is as well as a person, what strengths you bring, right? And I think if you can do that, it makes it much easier to show the value back to the company, right? Because if you're doing something that maybe you have a natural affinity to doing or a proclivity to, it becomes much easier to get other people enthusiastic about it as well, if it's something you love. But in terms of showing the value, I think historically or traditionally, it's probably something that people in advocacy roles haven't been terribly good at doing. But I think we need to get better at it, because at the end of the day, let's say the people who make the decisions, they want to know why they need to give you more money for resources, or why they should support you, what value it brings. And a lot of the time that can come down, to a monetary value, right? And there are different ways of showing that value. As I said, if you've managed to positively influence something that could have had a huge impact to the company, get the figures, speak to people within the company. Or even just, the value of, if you didn't know and you were out of compliance, what would that mean? That could be a big thing. Or, just having the knowledge early enough that you can plan your resources, that maybe you have a couple of options as to how, you can do it. So there are really, there's so many different ways you can show your value. And, I'd say kind of, think outside the box, just because it hasn't been done before or somebody hasn't shown it in that way doesn't mean that you can't.
Yeah. And talk about it as well. Don't expect, I mean, it's great when people do talk about your value, when you're not in the room and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, we did a really interesting podcast episode with Undina, who spoke about being visible, right? And it is about showing your value and talking about it. And it's not boasting if you're talking about results, actual facts, rather than your impressions of yourself, if you see what I mean. So and often, regulatory, it can be a massive asset to a company if you're able to explain what you do in a way where you're talking about market access, or you're talking about sales in a country, or in quality, like the savings that you're able to efficiency. So you can still talk about the impact that these functions have, even though they're not directly sales functions. You can still talk about the impact that they have on the figures of the company. So it's important to understand that and then to talk about it. You
100%. It's like if you don't have market access, you can have the best sales team in the world, but they'll have nothing to sell.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly that. Literally exactly that. So you also spoke about something really interesting that I also really support the idea, which is around energy. I don't know if you do you know the book 5 Dysfunctions of a Team?
No.
Doesn't matter. There's another concept by the same author, and it's called the 6 types of working genius. So if you've never done it, it's worth doing. You can Google it, and it's sort of one of these not directly personality maps, but what it does is it asks you a suite of questions that you fill out, and it will identify you as it will identify your areas of working genius, which are the areas or the situations in which you're full of energy. You could just do it forever because you just love it. It comes naturally to you. All the things that you were talking about, right? It's you really shine. And then also your working frustrations, right? So the things that if you do it for extended periods of time, it really, really drains your energy. And, you just don't feel, you don't feel happy, right, after you've been doing that. So it's about monitoring as well. Like, what are your working frustrations, and monitoring how much time are you actually spending doing things that are within your working frustration. To say that, you should never have any working frustrations, but being conscious of where you sit on that map. And it's a really good exercise to do as a team, because then you can actually see, as a team, how do we fit together? Like, so what are you brilliant at? And what is my working frustration? But who is the person that's brilliant at the area that I don't really like doing, that doesn't give me energy? And it allows you to also look at your team and make sure you've got the right people focused on the right tasks, doing the right things. And that ultimately is like optimization, right? And that when you can get that right, that's where you drive to exceptional results. So if you haven't seen it before, check it out. It's called Working Genius.
I definitely will. No, that's amazing. And I think it's so important because everybody brings something different. I know two people are the same. No two people have had the same path. Even if you're in the same function, even if you're in the same regulatory team, like regulatory is vast. There's so many different aspects to it. And yeah, I mean, I think finding that balance where you have the right people doing the right thing that, gives them energy is so important. Yeah, I love it. I'll definitely look that up.
I'd be interested to know what your working genius is. So in terms of, I had a question. So what about imposter syndrome? Because obviously, you step into situations, so on the concept of saying yes, sometimes you're saying yes to something where maybe you don't fit, or you don't tick all the boxes, right? And it's a stretch assignment. But how do you deal with this feeling of, should I really be here? Do I deserve to be here? Doubting yourself. How do you manage that?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that, imposter syndrome is definitely real. I have so many examples throughout my career where I thought, oh, these experts, and especially from that start of nearly being self-taught and thinking, I need validation, right? I'll go do some course now because in clinical pathology or whatever, because these are the experts, and and then doing the course and kind of going, oh dear, that wasn't right. But the imposter syndrome, like from giving a reg example, I remember the first time I went up to the trade association in Brussels, and I honestly kind of thought, oh, who am I to be here among all of these experts? Oh, if I open my mouth, they'll find out I know nothing, or not as much as they do. And I think to a certain extent, so far as possible, you need to become comfortable with not knowing everything. Nobody knows everything, right? And you have to understand that nobody knows everything. And, to that kind of conversation that we just had, that everybody brings something different to the table. And from an advocacy perspective, for me, what I've seen anyway is that it's important to have all of the voices around the table, right? Somebody could be a fantastic, mechanical engineer that really understands the devices. Somebody else could be a lawyer who really understands the law. Somebody else could bring something else to the table, and so on and so forth. But all of these people, none of them have the same set of knowledge, right? So everybody brings something unique, and I think you need to try to embrace that uniqueness in a way. But also, I would say, be curious, right? There's nothing wrong with not knowing. And I think that actually, the more you know, the higher up you get, the more you understand that there's that you don't know it all. And it's impossible to know it all. What you need to know is, have the right people on your team or the right SMEs in place, or tap into the right folks, to be able to do that. But I think, to be curious, to ask the right questions, and to not be afraid, to try to really kind of work on that. I do deserve a seat at this table. I do bring my own value. I think that's something that everybody has to work on. And you'd be surprised. I was talking to somebody the other day, somebody who's highly visible, right, in a very public role, and they are amazing at what they do. And every time they speak, you're just like, wow, one of these folks. And talking to them before they went to go and do one of these things, how are you? And I've quite a good relationship with them, and they were like, I'm shitting bricks, is what they said. And I was like, no. I was like, you are not. I was so shocked. I was like, I don't believe it. And yeah, I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to say. I was like, wow. And then, to see them speak and again, wow the room and get a big laugh and just be their amazing selves. But I think to also understand that, to a certain extent, everybody has it. Yeah. And I went, oh, wow, and I get that too. And that person looked at me and went, no, but you're so natural. And I was like, doesn't mean I'm, not half petrified. Yeah. Sometimes, going up to do some of these things. So, yeah. I think you just, you need to control it. And another thing that I find really helps me is that coming back to the energy, right? So you have all of this energy, and it depends on how you choose to look at it. I could look at that energy and go, oh, I'm so nervous. Oh God, this, and kind of let it be a hurdle or an obstacle that I need to get over. And how I've chosen, excuse me, to look at it is more, this is excitement. This is like, yeah, come on, we're going to do it. I feel this energy. This is going to be great. And it's kind of convincing yourself to a certain extent that that's how you've chosen to look at it. Because at the end of the day, it's down to you. Nobody else can, get rid of your imposter syndrome. Or obviously it's nice to get validation and be told you're good at your job and X, Y, and Z, but nobody else can get rid of that feeling apart from yourself. So I think it's taking baby steps, and to how you look at it, and, trying to come out the other side. I think you'll always have it to a certain extent, but the realization that everybody has it is also quite helpful.
Yeah, fully. I think everybody has imposter syndrome. I get it all the time. And I think just going with it sometimes like really, really helps, and recognizing, okay, yeah, I'm feeling this way, but I'm also here for a reason, right? I was asked to sit on this panel for a reason, because somebody sees the value that I bring in. So and now I have responsibilities to actually go through with it. And I think this is you've given such tangible tactical insights that's been so helpful, Olga, honestly. I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot, and I hope that our listeners have also learned a lot. We are literally, I can't believe this time has just absolutely flown by. We're coming to the end. We're coming to the episode. Goodness me, we're going to have to do part 2. But I have the big question that I want to ask you, which is the question that I ask everybody, which is, what is the legacy that you want to leave on the world?
That is, wow, it's just such a big question. I think I would like to be a positive influence, right? To bring different stakeholders together to have positive, to try and influence positive change, especially from a regulatory perspective. There's so much legislation coming down the track. And I think we're so lucky to work in an industry that, where we are saving lives or transforming lives or improving the quality of somebody's life. And everybody knows somebody who has a medical device, right? Whether it's your brother, your sister, your mother. So to ensure that we have a regulatory environment, moving forward that, ensures patient safety, but isn't overly burdensome, is a framework that is functional and predictable and still fosters innovation and things like that. And, moving or, trying for global harmonization and reliance and all these kind of lofty goals. I'm not saying I can do that personally, but if I could be a part of that, connecting people, bringing people together, being an honest actor, bringing some trust back into the system, things like that are important. And also, regulatory can sometimes seem very dull, but it doesn't have to be. You can still bring an element of fun, right? And I remember doing a presentation skills course years ago and them saying that, people don't remember what was written on the slide. Half the time they don't even remember what you said, but they remember how you made them feel. So if you're putting them to sleep, that's probably not great. So I think to bring an element of joy and a good energy, right? As you said, this energy is so important to be able to bring that. And I remember very recently somebody I didn't think would say this to me, turned around to me out of the blue and said, "You always make it fun." And this is a person I had gone like head to head with in a meeting, like not so long ago, like we're like battle stations, opposing opinions. But we did it with a good energy and there was no hard feelings. It was like, this is really what I think. And, but to be able to, give your opinion, say your piece, but do it in a way that brings people together, even if you've got opposing views. So I suppose to be a positive influence and, we bring people together. That's a very general, what would I like to do? But hey.
No, that's a fascinating answer and a positive answer, forward-looking answer. Oh, it was really, really fun. I have to say, it was really fun doing this episode with you. So to all of you listening, be sure to give this a thumbs up. Be sure to follow Olga on LinkedIn, comment, like, subscribe, watch it on YouTube so you can see how much fun we had together. Let me know if you want us to record a part 2.
Definitely.
It's been super fun. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks so much, Elena. It's always a pleasure. Always love meeting somebody who brings so much positive energy into the room every time with a big smile on your face. So thanks a million. It was a great opportunity.
And thanks for saying yes. Bye, everyone.